Hello and welcome to my favorite map of Napoleon Total War by far. This is probably one of the most interesting maps in the game, and you can just see probably why. I mean, if not over here because it's quite cloudy and foggy, you can see it on the mini-map over here. There are so many details to this map. It's just crisscrossed with rivers, ravines, marshlands and morasses. It's the ideal map for large battles, and it's big enough for any kind of operational play as well. It's not only tactical, but it also tests how you position your army as an entirety. But enough of my love for the map. Let's begin with introducing my own corps, and obviously I'm going to be playing as the French. I've brought along Marshal Soult with quite a few chasseurs and dragoons in the back. I have a brigade of Old Guard in the rear as my reserve. The rest are a mixture of Swiss Foot and Polish Legion, and as well as 4 chasseurs. The rule was 4 max light and 1 art. So I decided not to bring the Grand Battery of the Convention, the 8-gun battery, because it's going to get boring if you do that. It's a little bit too easy. So instead I opted to bring in a 6-pounder howitzer. On the other side of the map I'm joined by Elite, and he's brought along a Swedish corps. And the formation looks kind of, well, how should I put this? Kind of retarded, but that's actually on purpose, and that's a really good play. It's actually a smart play. Especially since we were going up against some very experienced players, actually. Especially the Russian player, the one deployed against myself. He was, I think he was 7 or 8 star general, so that's quite a few experience points under his belt. And you can see in the army composition, Russian Jaegers all along, and no 17th? No, just regular Russian Jaegers, along with 1 experimental howitzer. The rest are musketeers going all along the line. And then he has such a large array of uhlans, nothing but uhlans. 6 I think in total, or 5 rather in total. So quite a few cavalry units. Over here the Prussian corps is, well, they have a 12-pounder. They've already made a massive crossing over the bridge. And there's no risk to these guys in terms of being surrounded at this point. I'm way in the back here, and you can see Elite has completely deployed his men in columnar formation, and it's just line infantry after line infantry regiments marching in line. And they're purposefully delaying taking the crest of this hill so they can bait the massive deployment of Prussians right onto this hill, and trying to get them to basically commit to this battle. And I didn't want to basically threaten the Prussians from this flank either, so I actually kept back. I didn't go any further than this little chokehold that you see here, this little neck between these 2 massive, well, they're not exactly lakes, but these 2 bodies of water. So I wanted to just deploy my guns and get them into some kind of counter battery fire, and eventually, after these guys have committed in full, then I would deploy maybe 2 regiments of chasseurs to take care of his general and bring up the rest of my corps. But right now you could see that wasn't working so well. He was being too cautious for that. And I was actually starting to lose hope. I thought that it actually wouldn't work out. He wouldn't take the bait. But you can see it's starting to come to its own. The Jaegers have opened up fire on the Silesian Schützen as they try and make their way over. Still, the crest of the hill hasn't been taken by anyone. It's vacant. You can see him massing columns of hussars on his right, and finally very slowly deploying his men. But the Prussian 12 pounders are completely and utterly useless at this point. You can see this massive horde of Prussian fusiliers and musketeers just forcing their way across. Smartly, he's keeping back quite a large brigade of reserves. I think that was 2 foot guards and one 8th Life Regiment. I couldn't exactly make out, but he's purposefully pulling back so he can get the Prussians into his sphere of the battle. And you can see the counter battery fire is going on. I've started to target his experimental howitzers, but now that he's committed, I can actually start bringing up my men over here to make sure I have basically a steady pool of reserves to draw on when I want to go in and flank the Prussians from the rear. But towards this, force these guys into column. Mind you, these guys just don't make it into square, so completely and utterly disrupted this Prussian onslaught onto the center. And just look at the disparity in terms of the forces. There are 3 regiments of line and 3 regiments of horse against the entirety of the Prussian corps. Most of the Swedish corps is way in the back over here. And nothing's happening over here. It's just that I've seen an opportunity here, or what I thought was an opportunity, and I brought along all of my chasseurs de cheval, that is, to basically try and get his general when his attention is focused way on to this hill. And his general is way in the back over here, so it shouldn't be too easy for him to detect my onslaught with the cavalry. And these 12 pounders have no effect whatsoever. But he does see my men coming, and I was hoping these guys would fire, but apparently no. They're just going to charge in without firing, which was kind of odd. So instead, I was hoping that these guys would maybe open fire, but it doesn't seem that they're going to. I was just hoping for a single volley from their carbines right onto this general staff unit, but it doesn't look like it. Nope, they just charged in without firing. So kind of beating the purpose that I brought them here for, to basically fire off their carbines and then get to charge into their men. But yeah, so they basically squandered themselves.
Our men are running, sir!
And the general staff actually manages to get away, so all of my cavalry was for naught. I failed. And all along this bank of the river, it's nothing but Russian Jaegers. They're all Russian Jaegers, but I think they're all hidden. Yeah, they're all hidden. I don't think he's holding any back. As far as I know, he's brought along all of his Russian Jaegers over here. And yeah, you can see that Elite has actually ceded this part of the map. And there was no way he could have held out against the entirety of the Prussian corps all by his lonesome self, just by 3 regiments of line and just some cavalry. But you can see the Prussians took an absolute beating over here. Depleted cavalry, depleted all around. Not by much in these 3 regiments over here, but this one especially, almost down to half strength. This one especially. But it's a landwehr unit, and so is this one. So he's wisely kept the bulk of his men, the ones that matter, out of it, and instead you see his other reserves. They're relatively well kept. I think the foot guards, only 2 men as casualties. These foot guards only 5. 8th Life Regiment only 3. So the other regiments are very well preserved. Mind you, these Prussian Fusiliers, they've been slightly chipped away at. Not that one, but these 2. And I couldn't believe this when this was happening. I honestly was mounting for an assault against his rear, and to basically hold this town with whatever I had should the Russians come in and try and capture it. But he was actually coming to me. I couldn't believe my luck. And that means he's coming well within the range of my howitzers. So in a moment I'm just going to cease that useless fire against his experimental howitzers and turn those guns to the south and start firing away at his Prussian Fusiliers, and especially his more elite units. I think quite possibly the Foot Guards are by far the best looking infantry unit in the game. I'm not sure how many people agree with me, but I just love the way they look. Now, the reason why he launched his assault like this was because the overwhelming majority of these guys were actually hidden, I believe. Yeah, these guys were hidden just before they started moving off. And now his attention is divided. I can't believe he took a battered corps and divided it up between 2 people. This is basically going to be the end of him. He's trying to break through this chokehold. What he didn't realize was that this chokehold was actually quite well protected. He is bringing his lancers in, but they're going to get a volley from that line infantry over there. For me, there's nothing really to report other than skirmishing by the chasseurs, and these guys are getting pounded by the howitzers over here. I'm not sure if we've killed many of the 8th Life Regiments, but pretty soon my howitzers are going to blast these poor guys apart. And you can see the Swedish Cav came in just to save the day. Mind you, they did completely rout that Jaeger regiment, so that's less than ideal. And the Prussians actually seem to be giving these guys a hard time. Mind you, a returning unit from rout, which is really unlucky for the Prussian player. This unit was already routed, but it came back from routing. And you can see these guys are getting sandwiched in a chokehold, so there's very little chance of this guy making it out alive at this point. I'm shocked. I mean, the most experienced player, at least by ranking, was the Russian player, and he was almost comatose during this entire battle. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, how could such an incredibly experienced player be so docile? Finally, he's sending 3 columns of infantry to aid his friend. I'm not sure what he's doing. But you see that my plan to actually let him get engaged frontally by elite and then swoop in his rear was actually completely unnecessary, because he actually brought half of his corps, the most important part, to me anyway. So all of his elite reserve infantry and most of his actual light infantry are here, whilst the bulk of his fight was over there. I mean, it just made absolutely no sense. So, terrible mistake over there. And I'm not sure if I showed you this, but those shells from my howitzer were absolutely wreaking havoc on the foot guards. Well, not the foot guards, but the center regiment, the 8th Life Regiment. And these guys have been severely depleted just by me holding them back by skirmishing and then using my 6-pounder howitzers to pick them apart. Oh, and something I forgot to mention, there was a timer on this, which I had no idea. A 20-minute timer as well, which is almost no time at all. But in the grand scheme of things, it actually doesn't matter, and I'll explain why later. So yeah, especially for a map like Arcole, you want an hour at a minimum. Preferably, you wouldn't have a time limit at all. You can see I pressed forward to just make him stop. What he should have done here is basically try to hold this crossing whilst rushing his men along this estuary and then back over the river. I'm not sure what the Russians are doing. Now they're rushing backwards. I have no idea. The experimental howitzers are doing no damage whatsoever. I mean, terribly useless. Finally, I'm moving up, and this is going to be my turn to confront his corps. Pretty much up to now, there's been nothing but skirmishing. And slowly, I'm moving closer and closer to the bridge, so he wouldn't have a chance to actually use this passage to force his way right over the river. We don't want that. And he just gave his very first volley by the foot guards, which is less than ideal, to be honest. But I'm using my howitzers to target that exact foot guard, or this one, the 8th Life Regiment. Here comes his Lutzezov Free Corps. I'm going to force these guys into square, and that's just going to give me enough time to move up. I pull these guys back as soon as I see him form into square. That's not what I wanted, basically, to get my guys impaled on bayonets. And finally, you see the Russians coming in on force to occupy what I presume is Arcole. I'm not sure. I'm not sure which town is Arcole. And you can see Elite sent in his cavalry to absolutely wreak havoc all across this Prussian deployment. And the bulk of my corps has been unengaged. I have my elite cavalry reserve over here, my 2 regiments of Old Guard, half of my infantry still over here. And now Elite is moving in on force. So you can see on the minimap you can see it on the minimap. It's a complete encirclement of the Prussian corps. And there goes the general staff. I couldn't get him with my chasseurs de cheval, but it seems like this Swedish line infantry is going to get him. And finally, I bring in my dragoons to just take these guys' fire off me, so maybe I can redeploy. I think, yeah. And there's almost no time remaining. There are some Uhlans coming over, but it's completely in vain.
Our men are running, sir!
And he realizes it. I think he's going to withdraw. I think that was just my Dragoon regiment. Yeah, they're going to retire. They've had enough. This was quite brutal, actually. There's absolutely nowhere for these guys to go. And yeah, the Uhlans withdraw since I'm bringing up my line infantry just to protect these chasseurs. And that's it. The morale of the Prussians has just completely and utterly plummeted. You can see it on the minimap as well. And that was the end of the Prussians, actually. So we already won the battle. Now it was just a 2 versus 1 battle. And as if to save time, this inadvertently placed time limit just it just said, okay, the battle's been won. It's over. And you can see in terms of losses, just this poor guy just took enormous losses. Whereas this guy was basically not engaged at all. I'm not even sure how he lost 5 men. That's probably from shrapnel shells from my artillery. But anyway, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this short little sweet battle, and keep tuned for more.
I'll stand the glass around? For shame ye take no care, me boys, how stands the glass around? Let mirth and wine abound,